nightmare.
Why?
On many reasons. I want to thank Sresta for inviting us to come to speak on this panel today and to be a part of this amazing, amazing movement. And I was asked to talk briefly about charter schools, and what I could say thus far from everybody who's gone before me is ditto, and I could leave it there, but I will add a little bit to the effects that the newest privatizing corporate model of charter schools, the effect that that new reform effort has had on everything that's been said so far. I mean, I think we all know that students of color and students living in economically challenged urban communities are two of the most underrepresented and marginalized groups in education. Sadly, because of the racist history in our country, these two factors, race and economic disparity, too often intersect. And it's in these communities that the corporate privatization charter schools have sought as their way to make new profits. Education is the latest land grab in American history. A couple hundred years ago, it was the quote-unquote Wild West, and everybody went, "Wee-haw!" and like staked their land. The corporate reformers, I think, saw public education as a way to make money, and they said, "I want me a piece of that." And so they started legislating for reform efforts that enable new corporate model charter schools to go into these communities that are already struggling and fighting for a space in the economic and the educational landscape, for the rights to have a good, solid, meaningful curriculum. And they come in there using the language, co-opting the language in incredibly clever ways of social justice, of choice, of grassroots. They use this language in schools and in communities that are desperately seeking ways to provide better opportunities for their children. Right. And they use that to their advantage to get the communities on board. They make promises of greater choice and equity to the students with the greatest needs, but what they're doing is they're creating more inequality, greater disparity, and greater segregation in one of two ways. The first is, as I said, that they see the children as profit. Children have dollar signs on their head and what's called per pupil funding. For charter schools, the money is even more. So if your child is worth, and I put that in quotes, $6,000 in the public school, if they suddenly go to one of these new corporate model charter schools, a lot of those schools go from getting $6,000 to $18,000 for your child to attend that school. The largest portion of children attending charter schools are students of color, because largely it's in these districts that serve the same populations that shut down the public schools. So what Sresta and what Tim and what everybody on the panel has said thus far, if we show that these schools are failing, right, then we shut down the schools, and then these charter schools come in and say, "But here I am, I'm the savior. Let me, bring your children here at $18,000 a head and provide them with an alternative." There are quite a few problems with this. The first of which is that there's no statistical research out there that proves that these new schools, with all their money, are doing any better than their public school counterparts. What they've been doing is siphoning money from the communities in the public schools into their own pockets, and have not demonstrated any better improvement for the children they promised to serve. Schools like the KIPP school, Knowledge is Power, is what it's called. This is from research from Western Michigan University. Enroll a significantly higher portion of African American students than local school districts they draw from, but 40% of the black males they enroll leave between grades 6 and 8. So they bring the children in, but if they don't have to keep them, essentially is what it comes down to. They can cherry pick the students that they want to have. 15% of students disappear each year from the KIPP grade cohorts, compared to 3% in each of the grades in the local traditional school districts. So these schools are taking all our money, and they're not living up to any of the promises to help those communities. Another study that was done by the UCLA-based Civil Rights Project, CRP, called Choice Without Equity, Charter School Segregation and the Need for Civil Rights Standards. Did an interesting study, and according to theirs, 7 out of 10 black charter school students attend schools with extremely low numbers of white students. Black students account for 32% of the charter school enrollment nationwide, twice the percentage enrolled in public schools. However, Although the national totals of white students are under-enrolled in charter schools, patterns in the U.S. West, like in California and other areas like Colorado, where traditional public schools are the most racially diverse, show an over-enrollment of white students. Whites comprise 44% of students in traditional public schools in the West, yet charter schools in that region report 49% of students as white. In some states and metropolitan areas, white segregation is higher in charter schools, despite the fact that overall charters enroll fewer white students. So in essence, the privatizing model is a way to get around Brown versus Board, to get around equity and integration in schools, and to recreate a privatized model that resegregates students at a profit. In an interview with Gary Orfield with Democracy Now!, he said, it's segregation not just by race, but also by poverty, and that there are not only segregated black schools and some segregated Latino schools, but there's also segregated white schools that overrepresent whites in some states, including California. He adds in the interview that the Supreme Court decision back in the 1960s that if you had said you create a new school district and it increases segregation, it violates the Constitution. Charter schools, depending on the state, are often considered independent, their own school system basically. So we're creating new schools, a new school organization that are even more segregated than the existing ones, that do nothing, really anything, to try to make sure that this doesn't happen, that students who make these kinds of choices have diversity, and that all the values that it gives you in terms of academic preparation or preparation for life. And I just want to add this. I'm not reading that anymore. I did that because I get nervous. When I was doing a lot of this research and I was trying to find some statistics, here's the one that strikes me in the heart the most. And I'm going to read it first, and then I'll tell you where it's from. Quote, and this is a quote. I didn't write this. Okay. Parents have been given a choice as to where to send their children, and without government interference, many have selected schools with a student population that reflects the race of those children. In addition, many of these schools satisfy the children's longing to identify with their racial history by incorporating cultural studies relating to their ethnicity. There's nothing wrong with this, yet some think it is terrible. In fact, the majority of people prefer to be around others who are like them. Even those who enjoy international travel and experiencing other cultures still, for the most part, live the rest of their life among those of similar racial background. Why does this make some social engineers so angry? It's only natural. Each race should have the right to determine their own affairs without interference. This is why homogeneous nations are good for world peace. Everyone needs their own space, and parents who choose charter schools for their children based upon this fact are doing so instinctually, and it's healthy for their families. Now, when the KKK publicly endorses corporate model charter schools, it is time to run for the hills. Yes. Anything they're endorsing, the rest of our society should be looking at that and going, there's a huge problem here.
That's right.
And that's all I need to know to be an advocate against the corporate model of charter schools. If we've got that kind of money to start billion-dollar charter schools, why is this money not going back into the communities and back into the public schools to make them as good as the charter schools they promised? Because the money doesn't go back to the corporations who started them. And the paper trail is so obvious to anybody, I don't know why we're continuing to let it happen as a society. Thank you.